by how much it had just shaped every area of my teaching. It was just, it's amazing. Which, when you think of it, that is kind of duh, shouldn't it? But how I view my own role as a teacher, how I view the role of the learners, what I expect from them, how I shape the curriculum, the values I have. I mean, these are all things that how I speak to them. These are all things that I can see very tangible outworkings in my own teaching, drawn from what Proverbs 1-9 has to say.
That's awesome. It's amazing how that kind of teaching, how it impacts ourselves when we think about that kind of thing.
So learning from the wisdom of Proverbs, what should churches seek to teach their young people? Because we've talked about parents and passing on, but what should churches seek to teach them? And what should they equip parents to teach their children?
Each year when I teach Proverbs, I ask my students, how many of you have heard a series on the book of Proverbs, or tell me what exposure you've had to the book? And I'm surprised and dismayed that most every year it's like less than a quarter. And these are students who've come from good churches, Bible teaching churches. And what that indicates to me is that for all practical purposes, most churches aren't taking the book of Proverbs seriously. And consequently, they are not passing on this resource of wisdom that God has given to us. I'm not sure why that is, because the subjects that Proverbs talks about are so relevant to life for people everywhere from children up through older people, and certainly for high schoolers, college students, people that I work with. And so I think that the number one thing we have to contend with is why is it that we're not teaching wisdom from Proverbs? What are we doing in place of that? What are we teaching to our young people? I think the same thing with parents. The book of Proverbs is so accessible that I'm surprised that more parents don't make use of it when talking with their children. This is God's wisdom about what our speech should be like, or our use of money, or our interaction with friends, or the values that ought to drive our life, or how we interact with the people around us, whether it be at school or in business or in the neighborhood. I mean, there are all sorts of relevant topics in Proverbs. And so I think what we have to do is we have to mine this book for the truths that are so exceedingly relevant.
That's good. That's helpful.
Yes.
Now, both Ben and I, we went to the same college, and there was somebody that was kind of a dean at our college that I think would rightly stress as some helpful wisdom that he thinks that men and fathers should teach their sons and daughters important skills. Specifically, he thought it was important to teach sons and daughters skills like how to change a tire, how to change your oil, and stuff like that. But is it enough for parents to teach their kids skills and proficiency to operate and flourish in the world, whether it be skills for the trade or whether it be skills for changing a tire? And what's lacking in that approach potentially?
A while back, I ran into one of my former students at a conference, and I asked her a question that really surprised her. Because when you go to scholarly conferences, the first question you ask is, well, where are you? And the second question is, what are you working on? And I asked her a different question. I said, who are you becoming? That's a question of character that we don't often enough ask. We talk about the skills, we talk about the knowledge, we talk about the outputs, we talk about the status. But who are you becoming? Wisdom is all about that question and being able to answer that question well, that you're becoming the kind of person that fears the Lord.
That is such an important question that we all need to ask of our parenting, even those who parent pretty young kids like Ben and I.
Dan, thanks again for giving us your time and your insight and just years of poring over Scripture, teaching students, and your a warm pastor's heart and the wisdom of someone who has parented children. I assume you have grandchildren and dealt with a lot of young adults. It really came through, and I think it's going to be of value to our listeners. So thank you again for coming on the TFM podcast.
Yes.
Well, thanks for asking me.
We really appreciate it. So thank you, and God bless.
God bless.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Theological Family Ministry Podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, please give us a review on iTunes and share the podcast with your friends on social media. All new episodes are available to listen to on Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, Spreaker, and iTunes. We hope you have a great week, and join us again every first and third Thursday.